Thanks for stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this Nikko STA-5050 AM FM stereo receiver. The 1974 Buyer's Guide issue of Audio magazine, that would be the October issue, had a listing for this receiver. It said it had a retail price of $250, which would be about $1,500 today, and that it was rated at 24 watts per channel into 8 ohms, both channels driven at not more than 0.8% THD. It also listed a frequency response from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz as plus or minus 1 dB. We'll see how this thing does all these years later in a little bit. This particular receiver was found at a yard sale, complete with the original box and packing material, owner's manual, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But I wanted to comment a few things about it. First off, I think it's a handsome receiver. It has a very nice look to it. It has a good feel to the knobs. Now, none of the controls have detents in them. However, they do have a nice smooth feel to them, and I like the way a couple of switches here feel when they're engaged. So it came in the original packing material with the authorized service agencies. There's none in Arizona, and I'm curious how many of these would still be around, if any. It even has a little Nikko cleaning cloth. It has the original owner's manual and a schematic. So all this came with the unit back then. Also, it has the original box complete with the original packing material, and it even has a little the packing material even has the Nikko mark on it. So it's like a barn find for a car in some respects. Now, I did have some problems in that one of the channels wasn't working well. I cleaned and lubed the volume and balance controls and a couple of the switches, and it seemed to work really well. So I'm going to show kind of a tour of the front and the back and the inside of the unit, and then there will be the performance of the unit that I measured. I've already hooked it up and I listened to it. I wanted to do that at the front of the video this time. I decided to hook it up to my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 speakers, and those are a decently efficient speaker. Basically, it sounded okay. Now this thing, as you'll see in the data, is good for about 20 watts into 8 ohms. I did not measure it into 4 ohms. The speakers that I used were 4 ohm speakers, and I thought it sounded okay. If I'd had another receiver next to it that I could do some A/B comparisons, that would have been maybe a little bit more revealing, but just on its own, it sounded just fine. I want to use the word anemic in some ways. It's kind of like if I wanted to crank the volume up even more, I knew that I had limits on it. Kind of like having a 67 VW Bug and you're going up a steep mountain or something. It's kind of going to go, but it's not going to be very easy, and that's kind of the way I felt with this. But for just kind of easy listening, I thought it did fine, and I didn't really notice a great weakness in it at the lower levels. This would be a great unit for somebody that wants that kind of vintage feel to it. When the display's all lit up, it looks very nice. The FM tuner on it worked rather well, I thought. I did listen to some FM stations, and I thought that portion of it worked really well. It would be nice if you had kind of a smaller office or a little study or a smaller bedroom, and you wanted to get something that looked vintage that isn't going to break the bank, if you can even find one. And I think it would work very well with most speakers, as long as you aren't going to be trying to play this at a party or something where you want to crank the music up. If you kind of got an office and you want kind of music on to listen, or maybe a bedroom, some ambience music and all that, I think it does a really good job. Plus, I think it just looks really good. That's kind of my feelings about it. Like I said, if you could find one, it would be a nice unit. I think it's just very attractive. So it never got hot during any of the tests, and I just thought overall it worked fine for what it is. If you happen to see one, or this may be on Craigslist here in Tucson before too long, I think the owner will probably put it on Craigslist. This would be a nice little unit for somebody that kind of wants that vintage look. It has a decent sound to it, and I wouldn't have any problems recommending it if you can get one. Here is a close-up view of the Nikko STA-5050. Starting off right here, we have our power button. Above it is our FM tuning indicator right there. We have our speaker selector, so there's an off position, an A plus B, or a B. We have our headphone jack there. Here's our bass control, treble control, and this is our balance control. Here is our stereo mono switch. This is the FM muting switch, and this is our loudness switch, which doesn't really work very well, it turns out. Our volume control is here. We have tape monitor number 2 loop out here. Here is our tape selector for the different dubbing selections, etc. Here's our FM AM tuning dial right there, and here is our selector knob for dubbing, auxiliary phono, which is a moving magnet phono input, FM and AM, and you can kind of see the backlit display. I'm going to go ahead and kill the lights here, and we'll see if it looks any better. So hopefully that kind of shows up a little bit better. I'm not sure that it did. But this is obviously the rear of the Nikko, and it has a few different things on it that you don't normally see. We have our circuit breakers right here. There's a primary one and then one for each of the speakers. We have an unswitched AC outlet and a switched AC outlet. We have speaker outputs for 2 sets of speakers. The A set of speakers are these. These are your primary ones. And the B set of speakers are these, which use the RCA jacks, which is, it's old. Let's just say that. It's for very low powered speakers. The neat thing about these guys is that you push them in and then you can insert the wire from up above or below, but they work really nice. They'll probably take a 14 gauge wire, no problem, and they operate very nice as far as that kind of a speaker jack. We also have our tape monitor 1 inputs here. The tape monitor 2 inputs were on the front. They're 1/4 inch jacks that you saw earlier on the front. And here's our auxiliary input and our moving magnet phono input. Here are our FM and AM antenna connections. And this was for a 4-channel output for FM. We have a tape 1 DIN input. There was a 4-channel adapter for the FM stereo, I guess, that would have been hooked up through here. You would have moved the switch over to 4-channel, and normally it's in 2-channel. So that's kind of a tour of the back of this Nikko. This is the inside of the Nikko, and a few things to point out. This is our power amp board right here. And we have a voltage regulator rectifier board here. Here are our 2 main filter caps. They are 3300 microfarad at 35 volts. This is our power transformer. It's pretty tiny, but the overall neatness of this and the layout is just really, really sweet. Easy to get at. And here is our tuner board here. That's kind of just a very clean unit. It's amazingly clean, just almost like it was out of the factory clean. And this is kind of just another angle of the inside of the Nikko, kind of letting you see the wiring and the controls and this and that, and kind of how everything is connected to the power amp board. Here's the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz, with the Nikko putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohms. I have set the volume control to give 29 dB of gain. Our input is minus 12.9 dBV, or about 226 millivolts. The SNRs are 68, 69 dB, and the THD is, we'll call it 0.15% or better. Here is the frequency response of the Nikko, with it putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. There is a specification of plus or minus 1 dB from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and we are meeting that requirement with a worst case flatness of 0.9 of a dB at 20 kilohertz and plus 0.6 of a dB at around, oh, we'll say maybe 60, 70 hertz. Now, the channel balance is pretty good. It's maybe a half a dB, 4/10 of a dB, worst case between channels. And I should point out that none of the controls have detents. The balance control doesn't have a detent, neither do the treble or bass controls. So using the meter, I optimized them in order to get the flattest response that I could. They're not too far off from the center position as indicated by the knob, but they did require a little bit of tweaking. There was a specification for THD at 1 watt into 8 ohms, and that's where we're at now. The specification was less than 0.1% THD, and we are at 0.07%. So we are meeting that requirement. Right now we're looking at the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz with the Nikko putting out around 19 watts into 8 ohms. There is a specification for a maximum THD of 0.8% at the maximum output power, which is 24 watts into 8 ohms with both channels driven. So let's see what happens when I try to go there. I'll increase the input level a little bit. We're at about 20 watts, and you can kind of see how we're getting some more distortion. Some harmonics are coming up. We'll go up a little bit more. So we're still, the left channel is noisier. We're still at less than 0.8%. We're at 20.2 watts. And if I go up just a little bit more, we're at 0.58 and 0.5%. Just for grins, I'm going to turn off the left channel, and you can see the right channel looks pretty much the same. And so we're going to get maybe one more little bump here. We're at 21.5 watts, 21 watts at 0.6% for the left channel. We can go up just a little bit more. And that's probably about it. We're hitting the 0.75%, and our SNRs are also down. And the THD plus noise is also not looking very good. So we're going to say that safely this thing is going to put out about, we'll call it 20 watts into 8 ohms maybe. So it's not quite meeting its specification for output power. Here is the Nikko's multi-tone test results, and it's showing about, I'll call it maybe 9 bits of distortion-free range. So it's definitely not one of the higher performing units in that sense. Here is a plot showing the output impedance of the Nikko STA-5050. Now there is a specification for a damping factor of at least 30. If we take the best case scenario here for the lowest output impedance and we divide 8 by that, we're going to get a damping factor of around 11. This is a plot of the isolation between the left and right channels of the auxiliary input. In this case, we have a minus 13 dBV signal applied to the left channel input, and the right channel input is terminated into a short. While there is no specification for this, I thought I would measure it just because it can be important. Over at the high end of the band, we've got maybe 28 dB of isolation, mid-band maybe 48 dB, and at the low end of the band maybe 38 dB of isolation. So it's just kind of a figure of merit to compare it to other items that I have measured. Right now we're looking at the frequency response with the loudness off. I am going to flip it on now, and we'll see what happens to the frequency response. It looks like there's a boost on the low part of the band of maybe half a dB, and on the high end of the band it has an attenuated effect. So the specification for the loudness was plus 6 dB at 10 kilohertz and plus 10 dB at 70 hertz. So it is definitely not working the way that it was designed to. This is the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz with a 5 millivolt signal applied to the phono stage. Its THD is less than 0.02%. The only specification I could find on the phono stage was that the SNR had to be better than 60 dB. We're about 56 dB, so we're very close to meeting that requirement. We've got about 39 dB of gain from the phono stage. Here is the frequency response of the phono stage with a 5 millivolt signal applied, and this is measured at the tape monitor output.
There was not a specification, but I'm guessing it should be plus or minus 1 dB. So we're kind of off on the low end of the band. We're maybe a dB and a half. And at the high end of the band, we're not too far off. Maybe worst case, it looks like about 0.3 dB down. So overall, it's not the best phono response that I have seen.
Once again, I thank you for taking time out of your day or night to check out this video. If you have any comments, I love to hear from them and I always reply back. And if you like the video, please hit the like button. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. And until next time, have a great day or night.